This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War, Serving a Nation project in Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My name is Stetson Hall. I live in Osterville, Massachusetts.
Mr. Hall, what was it like growing up on Cape Cod?
It was a lot different. I grew up in Osterville, and Osterville's changed a lot. It's a lot more wealthy, I guess, than it was before. And when I grew up, there were a lot of blue-collar folks, a lot of service people, electricians and plumbers and that type of thing. Not a lot of money. My father worked in the post office. We didn't have a lot of money, but people ask me today, God, you must have a lot of money living in Osterville. And I say, no, I never did. It's just I was able to buy a home back when they weren't that expensive. And of course today the prices have gone crazy, but it's a lot different. Even the people are quite different. People are very wealthy, it seems like, a lot of people anyway. And back in my day, it just wasn't that way at all. I mean, there were some days you were wondering if you're going to get anything for Christmas. And a lot of kids were the same way. But today it's, of course, very, very different.
And what drew you back?
What drew me back was a job, actually. I majored in public health in college, and I did that kind of work in the service. And my first job was up in around Natick and Framingham near Boston. And I did that for a couple of years, and at that point I was dying to get back to Cape Cod, Osterville particularly. And it just so happened there was a job for somebody with my background in Barnstable County in Barnstable, Mass. And so I applied and I got the job, and I really essentially stayed here ever since.
Were you drafted or were you enlisted for the Vietnam War?
Actually, there was a draft going on in the Vietnam War, and I actually had a background that was very suitable for what the Army was looking for, namely public health, preventive medicine work. And so I was able to get, with my degree, a direct commission, so I went in as a second lieutenant into the Army, and that worked out especially well, because going in as an enlisted man and you're not sure if you're going to get assigned to infantry, and a lot of people didn't make it home from infantry, so I was exceedingly lucky, I guess, that I just had the right background and academic credentials, to get into this program.
What was the decision to enlist like? Was that hard?
No, it wasn't for me, because if I didn't go into the program, I would have been drafted, and I probably would have ended up in infantry as a rifle carrier in a platoon, and really had some bad experiences. So as an officer, it was much different. You were treated much differently, and you were actually a leader in the military versus a foot soldier and just taking orders and not really knowing what's going to happen. So you had a little more direction to your own life. So it worked out quite well.
What did you leave behind when you went to war?
What did I leave behind? Well, I didn't leave a lot, actually. I wasn't married. I didn't have any children or wife. Didn't have any pets. So there wasn't really a lot that I had to worry about when I was in the service. And I actually sort of looked forward to it, because it was a different challenge. I was actually looking forward to a good civilian job when I got out of the college. But the military sort of changed everything, and I followed a different career. Excuse me, I got a cough.
Did you have any passions or hobbies that you missed while you were away?
Well, I really liked my animals. I've always had dogs, and I have dogs presently. And no, I didn't have hobbies or things that would really keep me home. I was sort of a wanderlust person. I wanted to travel and see different parts of the world. So I was really not, too upset about leaving home and going into the military. It was actually a very easy decision.
Did you have any other relatives that had served in other wars?
My father was in the Navy during World War II. He was in Pearl Harbor after the Pearl Harbor attack. And both my uncles were also, one was in the Army, one was in the Air Force Army. So we did have a background of military folks.
Did your parents or other relatives ever talk to you about the war?
My father, you want to change it?
No.
My father was in the Navy and went to Pearl Harbor after the war, but he wasn't anti-military. He was actually pro-military, and so he didn't try to talk me out of it or anything. If anything, there was the feeling during the day that you probably should serve in the military. You should do your honor, do your duty, and once I got into the military and realized that things weren't quite as what they had hoped for.
What did daily life look like in Vietnam?
Well, in Vietnam, it was very, very different. It was living in a primitive country, really. That's the best way to explain it, I guess. You didn't have the amenities like we do here. You didn't have hot running water. It was a very primitive lifestyle. And the folks that you lived with were the same situation. They were primitive. They were, not terribly embellished with, the modern conveniences that we have today. So it was a shocking experience. It was a beautiful country. When I landed in Vietnam, I looked around and it was just beautiful, scenic, colorful environment. But after I was there for a short period of time, I realized that it was not only beautiful, but also very, very dangerous because there was a war going on. There was a war zone. And so that romance with a beautiful country soon changed.
So did it take you long to adjust to that?
Not really, because I was young. And I remember the first thing I noticed was the heat. It was terribly hot. And every day was like 100 degrees. And so you really had to get adjusted, to the temperature, and you were always tired, from the terrible heat. And so that was the first major adjustment, and it was very, very dry, and soon followed by the monsoon season, and then it rained every day. It was, pouring rain every single day, just torrential rains. So it was one extreme or the other, and that was took a lot of adjusting.
What was your happiest memory from the war?
I don't think I have a lot of happy memories. I guess the happiest memory was going on R&R to Hong Kong, and I remember taking a hot shower at the hotel that I stayed at. I must have stayed in that hot shower for 45 minutes. It was so pleasurable. It made me, I guess, if anything, it made me realize, the things we take for granted, back here, because it was a primitive lifestyle in every respect. And once you get home, you said, oh my God, I'm glad I'm not back there, because we have it so easy, compared to a lifestyle in a war zone.
I understand this is difficult, but what was your darkest memory?
Well, I had a few. Right off the bat, I arrived in Vietnam on New Year's Eve, and I arrived at the 90th Replacement Battalion, and everybody was drunk, and they were firing their weapons up in the air, and I thought, oh my God, and I couldn't sleep, because there was so much going on. In fact, there was so much, weapons and traces going up in the air. The helicopters were afraid to land. They thought the base had been overrun. And the next thing, I flew down to the 9th Infantry Division where I was based. And the plane that I was carried on landed on a steel runway. And when it hit the runway, it made like an explosion. So I thought the plane was going to blow up. And then every night for the first 2 weeks, we had incoming mortar and rocket fire. And so some people were killed, and I thought, oh my God, I'll never make it through this year. Probably the darkest moment was arriving in Vietnam and realizing the dangers. And then other dark moments were taking shortcuts, to some of the fire bases, the battalions. And one time we were almost killed by friendly fire. Artillery was coming in and they're going off, and I can remember the shrapnel hitting the Jeep, and I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to make it through this. And there were other dark moments, like the time a Vietnamese soldier pulled a weapon on me, and I thought he was going to kill me. And so there were a lot of dark moments, but I was, in the end, I was very lucky to get home in one piece, alive, first of all, and secondly, with no injuries that were life-threatening or, life-changing, such as missing a leg or an arm or something like that.
How would you describe the exchange between you and the soldier that you almost shot you?
Well, I didn't have much as far as the combat with other troops of the enemy. I did, however, had some bad experiences with the South Vietnamese, who were supposed to be our allies, and they didn't want to fight. They were lazy. They didn't want to be in a war, and we used to have some dangerous moments with them because of the communication barrier. They would get in between the enemy and us. Some got killed, and they would blame us, and there were some harsh moments with the South Vietnamese. The bad thing about the war was that you didn't really know who the enemy was. The Viet Cong, they looked like everybody else in the village until such time as they might pull out a weapon and shoot somebody, and it happened often. And so it wasn't always an enemy in uniform. A lot of times it was just somebody that looked like everybody else in the village, but they happened to be Viet Cong or, with the North Vietnamese army. And so you couldn't really trust anybody, and that was not too nice.
Who was the most influential person that you met during your service?
The most influential person, I'm trying to think, gosh, I think you've almost got me on this one. I can't really think of anybody. I met a veterinarian, actually, who was very nice to me, taught me a lot about, the field of public health and veterinary medicine, who was very influential, very honest, and, taught me a lot of life lessons and so forth. But other than that, I don't think I really had many influential people that I met in the service.
Could you please describe your bravest moment?
My bravest moment was we were going over a bridge, and back then they had these little narrow wooden bridges, and we had something protruding on the side of the Jeep that we were driving, and we hit one of the South Vietnamese soldiers that was protecting the troops by shooting at objects in the river, which might be bombs or something dangerous. And we accidentally hit the man, and he spun him around, and I thought, oh my God, we really almost killed this guy. And so he got up and he started firing his rifle at us over our heads. And I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? There was myself and 3 other people in the Jeep. So I knew he hit his knee, so I grabbed a first aid kit, and I walked back toward him, and he slowly lowered his rifle at my chest, and I thought, oh, this man's going to kill me. And walked up very slowly to him, and I showed him a first aid, insignia on the first aid kit. So he knew, I guess, hopefully, that I was trying to help. And so I got up to him, and he rolled up his, pant leg, and I applied some bandages and so forth. But at that point, I thought I was probably going to be dead, and he turned out to be okay once I showed some kindness. The other time really was the time getting hit by shrapnel from friendly fire artillery. We had no means of stopping it. We didn't have a radio, and it kept continuing, and eventually it stopped. But I thought we were going to get killed on that day. So there were a lot of days like that where you just had some heart-stopping moments,
So did you have to take the time to think what would happen if you didn't make it home?
Well, yeah, I mean, every day you woke up, you weren't sure if you were going to make it through the day. And so it was, it would gnaw away at you after a while. You'd get up in the morning, you'd plan these things, and you'd say, well, you'd write a letter maybe back home and that kind of thing. And you'd wonder, well, what happens if I don't make it? And almost every day was like that. And that was, it made it a very long, nasty year, I guess. So I was never so happy when I finally reached my last day. And everybody had to serve 365 days 1 year. And every time they'd say, well, you might get a 10-day break or something, they might send you home early. And actually, they came to me, my year was almost up, and they said, oh, you're lucky, you got a 10-day break. You can get back to the States 10 days early. So I went up to the replacement battalion to get a flight home. And they said, I'm sorry, but it's really not, it's fictitious. It's not really orders to get home. So I had to spend the whole year, and the last 10 days was in a place where I didn't really know anybody. And I spent Christmas Eve alone, and I was at the bar and with some other folks. So it was probably the loneliest point in my time there.
So did you make any close connections that you still?
Oh yeah. You make close friends when you're in a combat zone, and most of them I haven't really kept touch with. One in particular I have. One of my closest friends was killed, so of course his name's on the wall today. My other close friend lives in New York, so we get together once in a while, and we compare stories and stuff, and it's the type of thing. It's a friendship that nobody else can really understand, because you both went through some very similar circumstances. And my other friends back home, they just never served or didn't have to face what we had to face. So it's a very special relationship, when you have a friendship like that.
So what was losing your friend like?
It was devastating. Actually, he was killed before I got to Vietnam. He was infantry. He was my roommate, and the three of us lived together. And he was killed. He was only there about 3 months. And then my second, the one I'm still friends with today, he got orders, and he ended up actually in the same unit that I ended up with. So that's how we maintained our friendship, because I'd see him quite often. But when you lose somebody like that you really know, who was my age and had a lot of similar experiences and interests and that type of thing. So when he was killed, it was just devastating, because all of a sudden I said, uh-oh, this war is real. It's really, people are getting killed over there, because I just lost one of my good friends. So it was not pleasant.
Did you lose any other close friends while you were there?
Not close friends, but I lost a lot of people that I knew. And it's always, you think you're going to know somebody forever. You think things aren't going to happen to somebody. And then one day you're talking to them, and the next day they're gone. It's life-changing. You just realize that, life is very fragile and can be very short. And so you make the best of friendships, and you learn to be a lot more tolerant to people, because you never know. You be nice to people, and because you never know what's going to happen the next day. So it was a life-changing experience, I'd say.
At any point during your service, were your morals ever challenged?
My moral on TV. Well, on R&R, I guess there are challenges that you have to, overcome when you're in a R&R setting. So I was very good. I didn't fall into any bad habits, but it was very challenging, I must say.
I'm sorry, but could you please explain R&R
R&R is rest and recuperation. Everybody in Vietnam got to go on R&R, and usually you'd go after 6 months of service, and you could choose places like Hong Kong and Australia, nice, safe places. The only thing was, and I loved my R&R in Hong Kong, I really enjoyed it, but all the while you're there, you're thinking, this is after 6 months, you're thinking, oh, it's so beautiful, I'm going to the finest restaurants, I'm getting hot showers, I'm meeting nice people, but you're thinking, I'm only halfway through this war zone, and I have to go back, and will I make it back home? So that's it. Even though it was lovely and enjoyable, it was always gnawing at you that, oh my God, I might have to go back and get killed or see more people get killed. So it was a fleeting situation.
How did you feel when you learned you were going home?
Oh, ecstatic. Well, I knew when I was going home, but because everybody serves a year. But I remember boarding the plane, and of course the plane was full of GIs that had just fulfilled a year in Vietnam, and of course a lot of their buddies had been killed and everything. So when the plane took off, we got just airborne, and all of a sudden it was like an emotional thing. Everybody started cheering, oh, we're finally going to make it, because you didn't know if you were going to make it home. So it was a very incredible experience of jubilation, I guess, that you finally made it and you actually were going home.
What was it like adjusting back to civilian life?
Well, that was difficult because it was a very unpopular war, Vietnam. And when I got home, and I didn't realize how unpopular it had become. I was there in 1969, and the whole public thinking about war in Vietnam had changed. When I went in, I think there was a lot of support and do your duty kind of thing, and I felt like I was doing. I actually volunteered to go to Vietnam. But when I got back, I realized the public sentiment had changed completely, and people were very anti-war. And I remember getting a taxi cab, and I was still in uniform, the taxi cab swearing at us, calling us all kinds of names. And when I got home, there was no sympathy. You'd tell people you just got back from Vietnam, and they didn't say good job, or they'd say, oh, you were a fool, why'd you go there? And it's like you had caused the war. They were blaming the troops coming back because they thought that somehow they were instrumental, in causing the war and so forth. So it was it was not a good experience coming home back then.
So what were your own personal feelings on the war?
Well, it's funny. Before I got there, I was supportive of the war, and my parents were. And you go there and you do your duty, and But when I got there, and I was on the ground for maybe 3 weeks to a month, out in the boondocks, when I was there and realizing what was going on, like the South Vietnamese troops that we were supposed to be there defending, were terrible troops. They had no interest in defending the country. They just just wanted to get out of the service. They weren't interested in their own country. And so I realized that it was just, it was not a war that we should be in. And back then I thought, well, we're not going to win this thing because the people that are defending their own country don't want it. And the North Vietnamese were, more interested in winning and had more strength and emotion about, uniting the two countries. And so it was extremely disappointing realizing that the war was really a big mistake. And they would fly in, these very important people to find out the status of the war and how we were doing. And they would get these briefings in Saigon and these real safe places. And they would really get a snow job, how great we were doing in the war. The end of the war was in sight, the light at the end of the tunnel. How many times have you heard that? And of course, the people that were there realized that it was probably a terrible mistake, military blunder, actually being there. And of course, we ended up losing the war, which was sad to every veteran that served over there.
What life lessons did you learn from your time in Vietnam?
I guess especially to be appreciative of the things that people take for granted, like a hot shower, waking up in the morning and being safe, valuing friendships, and it was such a horrible experience there, just enjoying the treasures that we have here at home.
Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently?
No, I'd probably still do it because I did volunteer to go there, and at first I thought, oh my God, that's a terrible mistake. But in the end, I've had friendships, and I learned a lot, and I feel like I served my country, even though it was a mistake. But no, I'd probably do it again if I had the choice.
So would you say that you're proud of your service?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I received the Bronze Star when I was in Vietnam for valor, I guess. And so in Massachusetts, you can get a license plate with a Bronze Star on it, which I have. And so it makes you feel good, driving around, and other people are appreciative. Now they're appreciative. They weren't back then. So it was, so that was good.
Could you please tell us about the circumstances under which you received your Bronze Star?
Well, there were a lot of situations that were very, very dangerous, and you had to be brave and help people that were under fire, and I did that often. Sometimes we were in like caravans and we'd start getting fire, and so I would get off and try to help people, and we'd return fire and stuff. So it was, I guess, a year. What they looked at was the year that you served, and did you do things that were brave, and they felt that I did, so that's how I got the Bronze Star.
Was there any situation in particular that you think got you the Bronze Star?
No, I think just in general, the year-long experience that I was under, a lot of danger and doing some brave things and helping, our fellow troops that, got me the Bronze Star.
How did it feel to be recognized for what you did?
Oh, it felt very, very, very great, and it still feels great, really. And, back then, the sentiment was against going to war, and you were considered really kind of foolish, for being over there, and actually considered more like a criminal, for doing that type of work. But now I think people are really appreciative, and I think the thinking has completely changed. So now people value somebody that has some credentials like a Bronze Star, whereas they didn't back then. They didn't know what it was, and they didn't really care. But today I think people value that, and I've heard a lot of people say, God, I wish I had done the same thing, and they look up to you for, doing your job.
Who awarded you your Bronze Star?
Oh, it was a colonel, and it was so long ago. That was 1969, and we're about to get into 2019, so it was almost 50 years ago. In fact, I was thinking about it the other day. It was New Year's Eve, 1969, the start of the year 1969. And so this New Year's Eve, 1969, it'll be 50 years. So it's incredible.
When you hear the word Vietnam, what comes to mind?
Mistake. Hearing some of the generals talk about it like, it was a blunder. And the chief of defense, Secretary of Defense at the time, I remember him saying just within the last maybe 3 years that it was the biggest mistake of his life and probably the United States getting involved with the war. So that's probably, what I think of most, that, the people, and the government was lying to us because they knew really what was going on. And so they lied to the public about the need to be there, and we didn't really need to be there. It was just a big mistake. So that's what I think. It was a terrible blunder, And there were something like, what did I hear, 58,000 people that were killed in the time of Vietnam. So you think, did they die in vain? Well, you hate to admit it, but honest to God, they probably did, you know. And then I really am mad at George W. Bush, because he got us involved with another couple of wars, and he was in the Vietnam. He was a Vietnam era troop, and he should have known better. And he got us into a couple of wars that ended up in the Gulf War particularly, that ended up getting a lot of troops maimed and hurt and PTSD, and that was probably the worst blunder military blunder, I think, that in military history.
What positive long-term effects did your service in the military have on your life?
Well, I think the positive long-term effects are really just, having served under such adverse conditions, really appreciating what we have today, like a hot shower, being safe, the conditions we live under today are just so pleasant compared to a war zone. And you don't think of it every day, but you think of it pretty often, that you, your wife, and children, have things so much better than the people in a combat zone that were just under terrible duress all those years, and they probably still are. So you really do not take life for granted anymore.
What negative long-term effects would you say it had on your life?
Well, I had some problems with PTSD. That's post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I've had some adverse health conditions. Fortunately, the Veterans Administration reimburses me for them. But, some health conditions, and I'm still suffering from today, so that's probably the biggest negative, I guess.
Could you please describe your experience with PTSD?
Well, it's funny, when I got back, I didn't really understand that I even had PTSD, and didn't really think about it. And didn't know I had anything like that. And it wasn't until I actually retired from a civilian job. I was 59, I guess, at the time. And all of a sudden, I just started having all these emotions, started reliving the past and when I was in Vietnam. And it got so bad, and I was so terrified and depressed that my wife had to call the rescue. And I arrived at the Cape Cod Hospital and went through some treatment. And that's when I realized what it was. But they call it delayed PTSD, and a lot of people have that probably still don't understand what it is. But it's a terrible condition, and it brings on terrible emotion and thoughts of being back in time. But the depression part is just the worst experience of my life. Worse than any physical pain that I've ever been through,
Could you please explain some of your health issues that you suffered?
Well, I was exposed to the Agent Orange. It was a defoliant that they used in Vietnam. And I had some friends in the chemical corps, and they used to ask me to go up in a helicopter and spray this stuff. And I remember there was a big, huge vat, and they'd pour this concentrated Agent Orange into like a big vat of water, I guess it was. And we take a canoe paddle and stir it around, and it would get slopped all over my arms and stuff. So I know I really had a lot of exposure to this stuff. And so what happened was I developed a type of cancer maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And so I've been fighting this cancer for 3 years through different types of treatment. And after surgery, I thought I was all set, but then the cancer came back. So I had to go through chemotherapy and radiation. And today I'm cancer-free, I think. Although it takes a year to know for sure. But after 6 months, it looked really good, my blood tests. So that was probably the most harrowing life condition,
So when you think of Vietnam, what are some of the most prominent memories that come to mind?
Well, like I say, probably the times that we almost got killed. I guess that was the most fearful time. but also a lot of good memories too of making friends, lifelong friends, and you know, it's a type of thing where most of the time it's almost boring, and then all of a sudden, like 90% of the time it's boring, almost 95%. And then there's that 5% of the time you're just so terrified. You're just like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed over here. It's just such an up and down experience, you know, that you remember.
What advice would you give to somebody who is thinking about going into the military?
Oh, I think it's a good thing. I think it teaches discipline. I think it's a good experience. You make some close friendships. You get in shape. It's good physically, mentally. Mentally, you learn how to take orders and, you know, adjust to difficult situations. And physically, you really get into good condition. So I think it's a good thing for people to serve. And the interesting thing is, I think like less than 1% of the population actually serve in the military. And because it's back then when I was in, it was the draft, and you either did it or you got out of it somehow. But today, there's no requirement to go into the military, so there's no driving force. But I think it's a good thing overall. I think it prepares you better for life.
So before we wrap this up, is there any words that you want to end on?
Oh, I don't think so. I think I've said pretty much everything I meant to say, unless there's anything you have to ask me.
Nope. All right. Thank you so much for doing this interview with us.
All right.
More importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you. Very good.